Good evening. Thanks for coming out, everyone. We're going to get started. We're doing the, is this plugged in, Scott? Battery? Okay. We're going to get going with the Millage information session so that we can get done and wrap this up in time for the Meet the Candidates event at 7 o'clock. Thanks for coming out. My name is Jim Breckman. I'm the city manager. And I guess it's my pleasure to talk to you about a millage request that we have on the ballot for this November. What we're going to talk about is the bottom line, what's led us to this point today and why this is on the ballot for November, what happens if it doesn't pass. We'll talk in detail about the millage request. We will look at the pension unfunded liability overview, basically how did we get here, what we've done so far, and then we have some things that we can go through quickly, but the pension fund history and then a revenue overview. One thing that's kind of a struggle right now is that, home values are going up strongly in Pleasant Ridge right now, but yet the city is not participating in the benefits from those increases in property values. So we'll talk more about that. So the bottom line, our police pension fund is the largest fund of any of the groups in the city's pension. It's about 60% of the city's pension fund and pension liability. And it's 48% funded right now. Pension costs are nearly doubling from 2015 to 2021, at which point they'll be 12% of general fund expenses. About 10 years ago, they were about 3%. So that's been a big increase. We've been able to make cuts in the budget to absorb some of these costs that we'll talk about over the past 3 years. But we're getting to the point now where the cuts that we make will no longer be invisible, I guess, to residents, but they will actually start to impact the services that you see from the city. And the bottom line is soon we'll be able to pay our current retirees or our active police, but not both at the levels that we have today. So city revenues, they're constrained by Michigan's policy, by Michigan's laws, by Michigan's local government financing system. This graph is from the Michigan Municipal League, and it shows state revenue and municipal revenue from state sources. All you really need to know is that that's Michigan over there. From 2002 to 2012, Michigan saw a 60% decrease in the amount of money that the state sends to local governments. So that's a systemic issue that cities all across Michigan have struggled with. And I saw a graph somewhat like this that was updated through 2015, and we're now the only state that's seen decreases. In 2012, California, Minnesota, and Kansas had also seen decreases, but obviously much lower than Michigan. And the telling thing is that this blue line is what state revenues did over that same period. So we have the state government keeping more money and taking money away from local governments, which, quite frankly, adds stress to our operations here at the local level. Another summary of this is state shared revenue. This blue line is the actual amount of money the state sent us in each year since 1985. And the red line is what that is equal to adjusted for inflation. So as recently as 2000, we were getting the inflation adjusted equivalent of $500,000 a year from the state. Now we get about $250,000 a year. Another point that drives home what the state's been doing to us. Another challenge, as I stand before you today, as we've debated what to do about the pension funding issue that we're facing, is that we know that we came to you 3 years ago with a series of millage requests. And that at that time, those solved the problems that we had had from the Great Recession and the revenue we had lost. The issue is that through Headley rollbacks, we've lost a mill in our local tax rate over the last 3 years because of those rising property values that we talked about. What does that mean? It means for the average resident who's lived in Pleasant Ridge for 2 years has seen a city tax reduction of $115 a year. So rising property values benefit the residents because it drives your tax rate down because city revenues are constrained.
Jim, where should this represent you then?
We'll talk more about it.
I mean, you're totally misrepresenting.
How am I? Explain.
Tax dollars, every resident paying more tax dollars every year.
Well, not to the city, actually. I could go through and I could look at your taxes, and you pay less to the city than you did 2 years ago.
But our tax dollars are going up. You're misrepresenting.
The fraction might be down, but the actual amount we pay
It's going up.
Well, you've got the Ferndale Sinking Fund. That was a new millage. And I can't control that. That was approved by the voters for Ferndale.
I'm not asking where the money is going to, but you're representing that the tax dollars are going down. And residents are actually paying more tax dollars.
In the aggregate, our tax revenue went up 0.9% last year. For a resident who's lived here more than 2 years, though, and has not seen a pop-up, you're paying fewer. We can talk about that. So what happened? After the 2014 millage requests, MERS, which is the pension system that we're part of, they're the pension system for the vast majority of local governments in the state of Michigan, they did a study, they did an experience study, and they changed their assumptions. They released this study in June of 2015. This was after the last millage was passed, and they said people are living longer, so they increased their life expectancy. The market is returning less, so they lowered their expected rate of return. And they said if you have an unfunded liability, you now have to amortize that over 25 years. Basically what happened is we went from an interest-only mortgage that we were paying to fully amortizing that down, which all three of those things drove up our annual pension contribution requirements. They're phasing it in over 5 years, starting this year to 2021, until the full impact of that comes into place. The annual actual variation is on our website. You can look at it. You can see what the pension payments are going to be for the city. Now they let us know what those are 5 years in advance. And what happened is that you can see this is our annual city pension cost, starting from 1988 all the way through today, the blue line, 2017, and then it continues on up. So in 2014, when those millages were passed, we were around $200,000 a year in our annual pension payments. We've made some changes to lower costs in the immediate term, but then it will continue up to nearly double over the course of about 5 years from now. The past few years, we've absorbed $73,000 of the pension cost increase so far through cuts and efficiencies we've made. We have negotiated with the police and gotten concessions. We reopened the contract ahead of time to create new pension plans for the police and also to eliminate retirement health care. Now there's a defined contribution health savings plan that the city will contribute a small amount to, but the city will no longer offer health care to any retiree who's hired. And that handles 1/2 of our liability. But of course, this won't pay dividends. This won't really impact the bottom line of the city for years to come. Changes we make today will phase in 10, 15, 20 years from now. On the pension side, the new plans for police is a hybrid plan. It's a majority 401k style defined contribution plan and has a very small defined benefit portion. The multiplier is 1 on the new hybrid plan. Currently, the police get a 2.25 multiplier. So the defined benefit value is about 35% of what it was previously. Again, over time, this will limit the city's exposure to future unfunded liabilities. But we're still going to see the pension increase of $125,000 over the next 5 years. So the request is to authorize a millage levy of 1.4 mils. This would phase in over the course of 4 years at 0.35 mils per year. The reason for phasing is because we're trying to get ahead of this problem as much as we can. And phasing it in will limit the impact on any 1 year on tax bills.
Can you pause that? Go back, please.
Pardon?
Can you go back a slide, please?
This ballot language is also available on the website for review.
Where are the funds invested?
The funds invested in the pension fund, that's done by MERS. So we send it to MERS. MERS has active management. They manage the pension funds.
So you've got a savings of $73,000 on the previous slide, and you anticipate raising your shortfall to $125,000, to $50,750 in 2018. Is that correct? Is that how you're putting those two numbers together?
Right. So the 0.35 mils would raise $50,750 in 2018.
Go along with your own internal savings of $73,000 you just delineated on the previous slide.
Correct.
To make up your shortfall roughly $125,000.
The $125,000 shortfall will phase in. That won't happen next year. That's coming a few years down the road. So as the millage increases, it offsets the coming cost increases in the pension fund.
So where did that $73,000 worth of savings go? Will it go toward pension?
Absolutely, it already is. It's already going to the increased pension costs.
So what's your shortfall for 2018?
In 2018, we have a, we'll get to that. It's going to be about 11, we have an $11,000 shortfall in the general fund without the millage and without doing anything. And we're not going to do nothing. So we'll talk about that in a second.
5,000, is that over 5 years, or is that for a year, by the end of 5 years?
When do you anticipate that $125,000 shortfall?
We're here today at about 250,000. And so you'll see it's up to 375,000 in 2021, 2022.
So you anticipate a $125,000 shortfall by 2022?
Correct. And what we're also trying to do with the millage is the amortization period is 23 years. The millage runs for 15 years. So if we're going to do this, we're going to try to put more money in faster and get that money working for us to knock out our unfunded liability quicker.
Okay, so do you break out how you will spend this millage increase between the shortfall of anticipated pension benefits and the amortization required by the state?
Yes. Our police pension funding is $120,000 a year right now. We also have other pension groups that we have to fund. A few years from now, the police pension annual contribution requirement to just the police group will be easily over $150,000. All of the money that this millage raises will go straight to MERS. It will be a pass-through.
And that's inclusive of the new hires that won't be able to participate in a pension fund, in a pension plan at any time. This is for existing police officers that will retire in the next 5 years.
I don't know if they're, I don't know. It's police officers who are here who were hired before 2011 and our retirees who are in police group 02. Future hires will be a new cost that's in the fund, but this millage will go entirely to those pension payments to MERS.
So I just have a question. From 1988, it seems like at that point our costs are almost zero. Maybe it's a couple thousand, 5,000 maybe. Until now it's gone way up. I mean, we would kind of expect a little bit of an exponential as you go, but it seems like maybe it's rising up faster than I can explain without understanding more in depth.
We will go more in depth on the history of that. So the millage request is up to 1.4 mils for 15 years. Again, phases in at 0.35 mils a year over 4 years. The cost is $160 a year for the average resident when fully phased in. And the unfunded liability is expected to be eliminated at the end of the millage term, which would be about 8 years ahead of schedule per what MERS is forecasting with their amortization period. Yes, sir, in the back.
What's the average resident? What does that mean?
That's the average household value. So that's if you have a taxable value of $120,000 on your house. That is the mean, and it's close to the average or the median house in Pleasant Ridge.
Taxable value is half the assessed value.
Yeah, well, no. It's when the assessed value equals the taxable value when you buy your house. But then your state equalized value goes up at market rate, your taxable value goes up at the rate of inflation.
So it's your full taxable value. If your taxable value is $250,000, then you're going to pay it on $250,000.
Correct.
Correct.
It's an ad valorem millage based on the taxable value of your house.
So do you have a range then? We always talk about the median. What about the range of the increase?
The higher taxable values in town are around $550,000. So that's going to be 5 times that.
Just going back to the slide for 1 second. So when we say unfunded liability to be eliminated, what do you mean by eliminated?
I mean that our pension fund will be fully 100% funded. Under circumstances that the market continues to return on the investments that are in the pension fund. The pension fund is like an endowment. So as the employee works here, the city and the employee, through their contributions to that pension fund, are basically building an endowment for that employee's retirement. And then the pension fund, when they retire, it's like an annuity. And then you draw that down, and then the investment return and the balance are supposed to support that retirement. What happens is when you're only 50% funded, like we are, then the city, we have to reach into our pocket and make up the difference, because the pension fund is only returning half of what the benefit that we're paying to our retirees is.
So are you saying that at the end of the millage term, when the unfunded liability is eliminated, that the millage will be eliminated?
Correct.
You don't need that in perpetuity to keep this?
Correct. That's the plan. 15 years from now, what's the market going to do? I don't know. But as we stand here today, based on all the assumptions that MERS has given us, based on the problem we face, that is the plan.
What is MERS giving you as an anticipated rate of return?
7.75%.
Is that realistic?
According to MERS, yeah. I mean, if you look at the long-term rate of return in the market.
Is that what you realized? Has MERS realized that in the last 5 years?
Over the last 5 years, yes. Over the last 10 years, it's close to that, actually. Yes. Yes, sir.
Well, I was 15 years, picked as the time to get back to 100% rather than 25 years, picked as the time to get back to 100%. Since we're going to be since we're so underfunded.
Because time in the market, so you get your money in the market sooner and get it working for you. We would have had to ask for a total dollar amount from residents that was larger if we had tried to spread this out longer.
What are the total expected revenues from this millage over time?
Over the 15-year period, I'm not sure. I can tell you when it's fully phased in at 1.4 mils, that will generate about $195,000 a year. So if you multiply that over 15 years. And our unfunded liability is $2.6 million right now.
At the end of this, and here it talks about the future of police program,
Correct.
So is the effort then long-term to phase out defined benefit plans for city employees, or?
Yes, and we'll talk about what the city's done specifically to that end since 2011. But the hybrid plan, what that does is right now the downside risk if the market underperforms is all to the city. We have to make up the difference for the pension retirement. The hybrid plan splits the risk between employee and employer. And if the market does great, then the employee actually benefits from that because they have their own fund that will get higher returns. If it doesn't return as much, and we've done scenario analyses on these, and it gives the future police employees a fair retirement, but it does split that risk, and it does reduce the risk that the city's going to have large unfunded liabilities in the future. So this is the base case, the status quo, and this just goes and shows what general fund revenue has been and what it's projected to be. General fund expenditures, and you see we actually have a negative general fund revenue. That's because we've had some tax tribunals that lowered taxable values in the city. Down here, net revenue. This is what we realized in 15-16. We budgeted. We had a balanced budget last year, no more. This year we're budgeting a small surplus, but then you can see as these pension expenditures start to increase, going up 52% from 15-16 to 2021. Non-pension general fund expenditures, here's the 2473 to 2400. That's a $73,000 cut we've made. We basically have flat non-pension general fund expenditures decreasing by 0.7%. This is where we start to run deficits every year because of this increasing pension cost. And you can see what our general fund balance does, starts to be depleted. With the millage, and this is with the millage revenue phasing in at that 0.35 mils, our goal is to maintain a reasonable fund balance. Our non-pension general fund expenditures are projected to be the same, but what you can see here is our pension expenditures are actually go up 74% between 2015 and 2021 because we'd be putting in more money above and beyond what MERS requires us to catch up and try to eliminate that unfunded liability faster with the dedicated funds from this millage. So what happens if the millage doesn't pass? Our intent with this is to put this choice before the voters, because we're going to make the payments on our required pension payment no matter what. The question is, how are we going to do that? So we can raise revenue or we can make cuts. And if we're talking about $125,000 a year, which is roughly where this red line is, these are our largest city departments. And you can see that police and recreation are over 50% of the city's entire budget. The next largest is our fire contract with Ferndale. There's really no opportunity to drive that down further. On a per capita basis, we already pay just about the lowest in Oakland County for fire protection. There's really not much of an opportunity there. Public Works, we could eliminate 60% of the Public Works Department to make up the $125,000, but that's not a realistic option. We have to maintain the city. So cuts are going to come from these two departments just because that's where the largest opportunity is.
That doesn't necessarily make sense. They don't have the swipe in emergencies.
Correct, but
Say because we spend the most there, that's where the cuts will come. It's not a good way to approach a budget.
how do you make, the question is,
We can't hear.
I said it doesn't necessarily make sense that because those are the largest expenditures, that's where the cuts will go. Those expenditures are not all equal in urgency and importance.
so if we're going to cut from many of these other things, general government covers a lot of statutorily required things. I mean, this is mailings, notices, postage for sending out bills. There's not a lot of opportunity to cut there. The biggest other place to cut is personnel. So yeah, we could cut everyone's salary by 20% to get some of the way to that $125,000. But doing an across-the-board 20% pay cut wouldn't even get us to the $125,000 a year.
I would rather see us cut some of the flowers and landscaping from the bar.
Then cut police or other crucial city services.
Our flower budget is about $15,000 a year. We could plant no flowers and we'd save $15,000. We plant very economical flowers.
But didn't you show a general fund balance of almost $600,000? Is that unallocated?
That is unallocated general fund balance. We have a policy that we want to maintain a 25 to 30% general fund balance, and that's based on Government Finance Officers of America recommendations. The absolute minimum you want to have is 2 months of operation, so that's 16%. But for a small city like ours, one event could wipe out our small fund balance. So,
Well, with an unfunded liability, a deficit that you expect, it's not here today, but you expect it, if by 2021, you have a general fund balance of $600,000, which if at that time, if it continues to grow based on reasonable returns, wouldn't that cover a good portion of what you anticipate in terms of a liability that you have to cover?
the general fund balance, that's limited. We get about a 0.8% return on our fund balance because we can only invest in extremely liquid, low return vehicles per state law. So the fund balance really has no interest return. And it's $125,000 a year. Yes, we could make up for that with fund balance, but not for 20 years. We would basically end up at the same place where we were broke with no fund balance and we would have to make cuts.
Yeah. So why are you projecting such a flat to negative revenue increase to your general fund? Taxable values go up every year. And anytime a house is sold, it resets the taxable value. I think you're being very conservative on that.
It resets the taxable value, but that's why you pay less taxes to the city now than you did 2 years ago.
I know,
the Headley Amendment drives the millage rate down when that happens.
And why did they put the Headley Amendment in place to begin with?
They put that in place the Headley Amendment works fine by itself.
They put it in place to protect the citizens for increased taxes on taxable values that are going up because we don't realize the taxable value unless we sell the house.
Right.
That's why it was put in place.
By state law, so the last 2 years, 2 years ago we had a 0.3% cap on what our tax revenue could increase. Last year, it was 0.9%. So that was the limit on what city tax revenue, what city tax collections could be. And that's because the Walker Wire properties, there's a tax tribunal. Those are the two largest value properties in town, and the value of those were cut by about 40% when they went to the tax tribunal. Basically, the owners of those properties were paying overvalued taxes on those for a long time. So those two properties alone, when they reduced the taxable value on those, reduced revenues to the city by about $45,000 a year.
What is that? What property is that?
The Walker Wire properties over on the other side of the train tracks, the old steel plant. Yes, sir.
How many participants in our plan?
Pardon?
How many participants in our plan?
We have about 31, I believe. That includes retirees and actives. Active participants, I think we're at 10.
Active participants are people who aren't collecting yet?
Correct. That's employees who are
And current employees?
active
So
employees.
you have 21 retirees and 10 current employees who aren't collecting yet?
I believe. I'd have to look at the study,
That's a
but
lot of money.
that's offhand, yes. So, again, just to quickly run through this, retiree costs, this includes retiree health care. It's a legacy cost. This is the police department budget. Active personnel, and that's our chief, our sergeant, our patrol officers, and our part-time officers. Just our full-time patrol officer salaries are $300. Non-personnel costs, equipment, ammunition, subscriptions, Clemis, everything that the police department needs to run is about $200,000 a year. And this number is the one that's going to be going up. So one potential way to solve this issue would be to not be a full-service 24/7 police department. Not saying we're going to get rid of our police department, but we may have to look at ways of contracting for coverage part of the day. Eliminating 2 full-time police officer positions would allow us to make up the increased pension costs. That would be a potential savings of $50,000 to $80,000 a year. The other largest department is recreation, where we have $202,000 of employee costs. That includes all the part-timers, the desk help, pool help. We have about $92,000 of programming costs, and then $85,000 maintenance, upkeep, utilities, just keeping the building up, running, maintained, the lights on, the heat. If we cut staff and almost all of our recreation programming, we could save $20,000 to $70,000 a year. $70,000 is if we make drastic cuts.
What is the program cost?
The programming, a lot of the programming is somewhat self-sustaining. A lot of that is events that the city funds that would be eliminated. The summer rec program, the summer camp, there is a small subsidy that we provide to that, and we're looking at that now, actually, to make sure that that's covering itself. We did that for the swim team last year. The swim team is self-sustaining now. There's no subsidy there. So when we,
If we're saying that that's how much you would cut it by, or that's how much it currently costs annually now, the 92.5?
the 92.5 is what it costs now for all of our programming.
All right, so that doesn't sound like it's self-sustaining, like the programs are self-sustaining, no?
There are revenues that come along with that. So we'd lose those revenues. We'd lose the costs on the programming. We'd lose the...
We should have the revenues aside so that we understand, like, where the, if you're losing those, if you cancel certain programs, then you lose the cost, but you also lose the revenue, then
Right.
obviously that's...
What's the net cost?
The net cost of...
Program. What's the subsidized cost? What is the city paying over and above the revenue that...
Summer camp is subsidized at about $10,000 a year, I think. And we're looking at preliminary numbers, but that's about what we subsidize summer camp. Everything else, programming-wise, is our events. The 15 Over Club events, they take care of themselves. The cost there is staff cost to organize and maintain those, and that's not paid for by the fees that go along with a 50-plus club field trip. This is the Halloween hayride, the ice cream social. Events like that are where a lot of this cost comes. So it'd be eliminating those community events.
Jim, directionally, like, is 50% of it pass through or 25% of it pass through? As far as
the big events like the hayride, the Easter egg hunt, the ice cream social, those are mainly subsidized. I mean, we don't really collect money except for some of the food that we buy at the hayride. The rest of it is subsidized. There are other like small events that we'll do, like if we do a movie in the park. We don't charge for that. There's a lot of the little events that we don't charge for. Those are subsidized by your tax dollars. That's part of the benefit of, living here and having those services. So, it's the revenue on some of the programs is very, very small.
And again, these are back of the envelope numbers. We haven't put pencil to paper. We haven't negotiated. We haven't talked to any other police departments about these. These are, again, back of the envelope numbers. If the millage fails, we'll be coming back and looking at these with fine point numbers. And we'll have all the detail at that point to figure out what we're going to do to make up for this shortfall over the coming years.
In order for us to make an informed decision about whether or not to support the millage, we would need to know what the actual cuts would be. Not just say, oh, well, we'll have to come back with a sharper pencil.
Well, we've done back of the envelope. We know enough that there's going to be an impact to police and recreation. And then there will be an impact to some other city services. Are pay cuts across the board for staff on the table? Absolutely. And none of these things on their own are going to solve the problem. So it's going to be a menu of choices. We haven't convened the community discussion about what's important to the residents to absolutely save and what else goes. But there are choices involved in that.
What's the assumption on home sales when you're talking about tax revenue?
Let's talk about that. I'm going to skip the history of the pension fund now. So why rising property values won't solve the problem? This is our property value. This is assessed property value, state equalized value. It's 1/2 of the market value of your home. This is aggregate across the city. And this is taxable property value. Taxable property value by Prop A can only go up at the rate of inflation every year. So if you own a home, your taxable value went up 0.9% last year. The assessed value of all homes in the city went up 6%. The taxable value went up 3.9% because of home sales becoming uncapped. And when they became uncapped, that caused that particular property to raise. But tax revenue could only increase by 0.9% in the city. The Headley Amendment limits the total city property tax revenue growth to the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever is less. And again, the last 2 years has been 0.3% and 0.9%. The property tax formula is the taxable value of your home times the millage rate, and that's the property tax you pay. Again, all of the numbers I'm going to show in here are the city property tax rate, not your total property tax bill to the schools, to the county. Ferndale Schools collects just as much property tax from city residents almost as the city does. So that has a definite impact on your property tax bill as well. But if the taxable value grows faster than inflation, the millage rate is reduced or rolled back to make sure that the city's tax collections only increase equal to inflation. So you can see the city's millage rate history. The bottom line is that in 2015-16, it was 22.5595, and then due to Headley rollbacks over the last 2 years, it's now 21.5684. And again, that's because taxable values grew faster than the rate of inflation, so the Headley Amendment pushed our millage rate down. So this is an example of a capped property. And if you can read it, good for you. But right here it says, 2016, there was not a transfer of ownership. And you get mailed this every year in January, February from the county. So again, here, there was not a transfer of ownership on this property. So what you can see is that the assessed value right here went up from $165,000 to $178,000. That's an 8.1% growth in assessed value. That's the market value of your home. The taxable value went from $111,480 to $112,480. That's a taxable value growth of that 0.9%. So in 2016 on this house, the taxable value of $111,480 at the 2016 tax rate of 21.9604 mils, this house paid $2,448 to the city. In 2017, at 21.5684 mils, at the taxable value of $112,480 times the millage rate, that house will pay $2,426 to the city. That's a $22 reduction in the amount of taxes that house pays to the city in 2017 versus 2016. And of course, there was the reduction from 2015 to 2016 as well. So the total reduction for this house would be about $80 over the past 2 years that they paid to the city. This is an example of an uncapped property. In other words, a property that sold in the last year, and that taxable value became uncapped and popped up to equal the assessed value on that house. So here, there was a property transfer. You can see the assessed value went from $130,000 to $140,000. That's an assessed value growth of 7.7%. But the taxable value went from $92,500 to $140,000, a taxable value growth of 52%. So that particular house is paying a lot more in taxes. So when you add up the decrease in all the houses that were capped and the increase in all the houses that became uncapped, the difference between those is 0.9% of city tax revenue. So when we say that uncapped, when your neighbor sells their house, go thank them because they just reduced your taxes. Because the city millage rate was reduced by 1.8%, and your taxable value went up by 0.9%. So again, this house saw a $1,000 increase in the amount of property tax that they paid. The house paid. The people were different.
So when you apply those millage rate reductions, I'm seeing like the breakdown from year to year. How is it just across the board on whatever?
Across the board.
Okay. So everything is reduced the same percentage if it's
Correct.
Affected by that.
Right. Yep. Ad valorem applies everyone equally. It's the same rate. So again, this is just an example. The taxable value, the total taxable value went up 3.9%. All the houses that sold in 2016, the taxable value on those properties went up almost 48%. The taxable value on properties that did not sell went up 0.7%. Some houses went to the tax tribunal and had their taxable values lowered. So that is why it's 0.7 instead of 0.9. So 1,043 properties paid less taxes to the city in 2017 versus 2016. And again, this is just the formula. Taxable value goes up 3.9%, millage rate goes down 1.8%, property taxes collected by the city go up 0.9%. So that's why the city's limited. Assessed values, home sales are strong, but we're always going to be limited to the rate of growth of inflation, which does not equal the rate of growth in the pension payments we're looking at in the future.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I noticed that in the breakdown here of the villages, everything goes down every year except for community promotion.
Correct. That was not at Headley cap yet, but that's at the community promotion millage is at its maximum now. That can't go up anymore.
You mean after 17?
Correct. And the pool debt does not is not affected by Headley as well. Pool debt, the millage rate is set equal to generate enough to pay off the bonds. Debt millages are exempt from Headley. Does anyone want me to go through the history of the pension fund? That's the one thing we skipped over. Okay, we'll quickly go through that then. Okay, actions taken. Specifically, Police Group 2 and Admin Group 10 were closed to new hires in 2011. Those both had a 2.5 multiplier. In 2011, new groups were created, a police group that had a 2.25 multiplier and a 1.7 multiplier for admin. Both of those groups for employees who came between 2011 and now are fully funded or nearly so. Yes. A multiplier. A multiplier is how you determine what an employee's retirement benefit is. You take the multiplier times the years of service times their final average compensation. And the multiplier is a percentage. So it's 2.25%. If an employer was here for 30 years and their final average compensation was $60,000 a year, you just take 30 times 60,000 times 2.25%. And then that's their annual retirement benefit that they get from their pension. So that's why when you look at these numbers, a 1.7 to 2.25, they look like they're not far off, but as a percentage, that's a 40% roughly. I don't have a calculator in front of me, but it's a big difference in terms of the benefit that's paid out. In 2011, employee contributions across the board were increased to 2.5% police and 3% for admin. 2017, we went back to the police, opened up the contract. There's now a hybrid plan in place for any new hires. There's a healthcare savings plan in place for new hires in lieu of retirement healthcare. Again, this will be a long-term cost savings for the city. And we do have an open police officer position right now that we're not filling. We're down to 3 full-time patrol officers at the moment because Officer Fern retired. And with the uncertainty of what's happening with the millage, we're keeping that position open until we find out what happens in November, at which time we'll figure out what to do based on the results. So, the pension benefit history. Starting in 1946, we won the war and things were great. We had a 5% employee contribution and a 1.7 multiplier for employees. And this was for police and non-union. And this held for almost 40 years. In 1982, the contribution was reduced from 5% to 0%. Multiplier stayed the same. 1989, the multiplier was increased from 1.7 to 2. 1992, the multiplier was increased again to 2.25, and then in 1998, the multiplier was increased to 2.5%. So we had rising benefits. And of course, with these rising benefits, when you increase the benefit you provide by 40%, that increased your liability that wasn't in the fund at that time. In 2011, there's a contribution, 2.5% contribution that the police agreed to, and then the police group was closed to new hires and it was replaced by new groups. And you had the same basic story on the non-union side, although different timing. The pension groups created after 2011 are stable. They're 89 to 102% funded. Yes, sir?
Is there a reason that the city has why, as the benefit went up, it wasn't funded?
MERS wasn't good, quite honestly. MERS didn't provide you 5-year projections on what your pension payments were going to be until 2015. MERS didn't require you to amortize unfunded liabilities until 2015. MERS just kind of, the Michigan Employee Retirement System, Municipal Employee Retirement System.
Could have. I mean, we didn't know that this wasn't going to fund it.
We would have had to have done our own actuarial studies on our own. I don't know.
We weren't given any money, and the liabilities were, doubling.
The problems didn't become evident until somewhat recently, I suppose.
You need to do like a ton of study to understand that if you keep increasing the benefits without
You don't put any money in.
how much you're paying into it, you're going to have a problem.
You know,
Especially over a long period of time.
I don't want this to be a blame game. I mean, that was 20 years ago at this point. We're dealing with the situation in front of us now.
I think that it's important that we learn what the mistakes were so that we don't do those again. That we change our policies, which obviously we're doing, to prevent that from happening.
Right. And MERS is doing the right things now by requiring amortization on the unfunded liabilities, by requiring you to catch up with this, by doing the 5-year projections, by looking at their experience study. MERS is on the right path to get everyone on financial health. But we're far from the only community dealing with this. Meridian Township just passed a very similar millage to what we're asking for in August. There's a lot of communities around the state that have unfunded liabilities very similar to ours, and they're all trying to figure out what to do about it. Pardon?
Yeah, I don't live there. I don't really care.
Yeah, I understand. Yes, but, it's so again, we've talked about these other things. The history. This is our funding levels. We were 100% funded all the way up until 2000. So, why wasn't this looked at? Things were going fine for a long time. But what I've done here is this is the S&P 500 return, just a proxy for the market rate of return that the pension fund is going to generate. So on the timeline, you can see these events that occurred that created the situation we have today. And again, that mid-90s boom where we were getting 20, 30, 35% returns 5-6 years in a row pumped up the fund. That was kind of an abnormal period. But then the tech bubble popped. We had bad returns, and you can see that the decline in the funding level started. The blue line is the total city pension fund. The red line is the police fund. You can see that they track each other pretty closely. So as more and more people retired and started to draw down the system, and as market the market had some problems, the funding level declined. You can even see that we've had a fairly good market in recent years, but it really hasn't impacted our funding level.
So this has been a problem that's been just growing and growing for a long time,
Yes.
pretty steadily.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, but it doesn't seem to have made any.
So there were two ways that the city was going to be able to handle this. If MERS didn't require amortization, we perhaps could continue to be doing the interest-only payments and extend the higher pension cost over a longer period of time, and maybe we could bear that in the general fund. But when MERS changed those assumptions in 2015, it pushed those costs even higher to the point where, it's forcing us into a decision. Okay. Anything else? Any other comments? Any other questions?
Example, I'm familiar with two different pension funds, and one is a multi-employer fund, and they are in deep trouble. Partly, as the government changed how they calculate what your unfunded liability is. So that changed a few years ago. And if this unfunded liability gets too big, then they declare you to be out of business, sort of. And one of my pensions is right on the edge, and every year we get a notice about where this funding, where the funding is. And I was a part of another pension where we had to bargain our benefits, and we did the same thing. The board of directors was tired of a defined benefit pension. Of course, nobody wants that liability, right? So we went to this hybrid thing too, where most of it's your own money out of your salary and with a little help from your boss, And so those are, I consider those to be good decisions, and I don't hold them. I don't blame them for this sudden trouble. Practically every pension fund in the country is in.
Right. It's more are in this position than are not. Yes.
The pension and the non-police or the administrative pension, whatever the other bucket is.
Yes.
What are you doing for that? Is this just an increase?
The police are the vast majority. They're the largest group. Let me pull up the slide. So you can see here, I'll read out the numbers to you. This is the unfunded liability for police. It's 1.7 million. The next group is non-union at 667,000, and this actually went down last year. Police went up. The city manager, 223,000. I don't get a defined benefit pension anymore. That's been closed for city manager, so I'm completely 401k. You can see the active employee. There's a zeros there. General other. This is pretty much our old DPW. So these are guys who are way back. So the total is in the $2.7 million range. Police are $1.7 million of that. So
Why are we not dealing with all of this problem?
we will be. We will be.
Why are we splitting this up?
Because if we can take care of the police pension, the city, with the cuts we've made, can take care of the rest of the pensions. I mean, it's all fungible at some point. Money's fungible. But the millage will handle the police. The cuts we've made will handle the rest of the departments, the rest of the groups. And those two groups I talked about, non-union after 2011, that actually has a surplus of $704, so that's great. And then police, as of 2011, we have an unfunded liability of $4,400, so we can deal with that.
So of these liabilities we have in the future, assuming we take care of the police situation, we get that funded with the bills, right, or whatever needs to do that. Do we have any other unfunded liabilities that we still need to deal with?
The only other unfunded liability we have is retirement health care. So we have an OPEB liability as well. Now, on OPEB, we can remain pay-as-you-go. We've done a number of things on the healthcare side. We've gone to a high deductible plan with the healthcare savings account. That saved us a lot of money last year, and that controlled costs. Let me see if I can find it. This is benefit costs compared to inflation since 2006, and there's no magic to 2006. It's just the latest year that we had good segregated data on all these things. You can see that healthcare is this yellow line here. It's gone up, but we've managed to control that. We can continue to pay that off. For now, we can continue to bear that cost. It hasn't gone up much. It's built into the budget. We can continue to do healthcare. Once the retirement healthcare savings plan employees come in, then that retirement healthcare cost will start to taper down. 25 years from now, you know, we'll be basically freer of these legacy costs for employees.
What kind of a plan then do the employees have for healthcare?
New, what are you asking, active employees?
For the current employees that are active, that are not part of the, you know, the current healthcare plan
Yes.
retirees have, what is their benefit for retiree funds?
Well, if you're an active employee, you get the same health care that active employees get. And we are a small group, so we can only offer one plan. And that is subject to.
What do they have now while they're working? I'm asking the people working now, what do they get as retirement?
They get the same plan that active employees get. So right now, the retirees get the same health care plan that our active employees get. Until you turn 65, then you go to Medicare, and we provide a Medicare Advantage plan.
Okay.
Shouldn't you benchmark that across other municipalities?
Yeah,
The industries out there just don't offer that anymore. That surprises me.
they don't. We have benchmarked it extensively amongst other communities. It is a benefit that's negotiated through collective bargaining with the police. We are right there in the middle of the group with what police benefits get.
The industry took that away about 10 years ago already.
Right. Well, last year we moved to the high deductible health care plan with the health savings account. That drove our costs down a little bit. But yes, that's.
So I'm a little confused. You're saying that in 25 years, this retirement health care cost that we have right now will go away. How does that go away?
To be morbid, it goes away through mortality.
They're still offering it.
Right. What I'm trying to say is that once the people are working now, once they retire in 20 years, aren't we paying for them?
Yes, we will be.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that get rid of this liability?
Any employee hired from today, from this year, well, administrative employees since 2011 have gotten no retirement health care. Police, starting in 2017, get no retirement health care.
Okay, so that is not what you were just saying.
Okay,
You're talking in a way.
Okay, let's break this into two groups. You've got the people who are here before 2011 or before 2017. They've been promised a retiree health care, they're going to get it. If you're an admin employee after 2011 or a police employee after 2017, you get the retirement health care savings plan. It's a 401k style plan for retirement health care, but the city's not providing you health care when you retire.
You can save for your own retirement health.
Correct. And so, you know, as this expense passes through the system, eventually down the road, yes, we will take care of it. Okay, understood.
One does not have health, be able to have some kind of
Correct.
plan for health care, but
Correct.
you can't keep signing up to all of these payments down in the future when we have no idea what things are cost or how many people are going to be on it or all of that.
Right. So that's why we have taken the steps to eliminate this problem from growing in the future. And at this point, we have to live up to the promises we've made to the employees when they came here and signed up, the police, our admin employees from before 2011.
Call for pay for what you're going to pay either services employees pay it that year for what you're getting that year. Meaning if they need as part of their benefit retirement health care or 401k, you pay all of that this year. And if it changes because of economics or whatever's happening in the world 5 years from now, then that changes from now on. They still have time to plan, and we're not stuck with a bill.
Right.
Okay.
And that's the whole point of the retirement health care savings plan. And what it's actually doing is the city never put money away we didn't have an OPEB trust. We didn't put money away for retirement health care. We just went pay as you go. And that's fine. Many cities do that. Now with retirement health care savings, the city does contribute a small amount. I think it's 2%, 3% of the employee's salary. But that way we are paying our retirement health care liability each year as that, you know, occurs. So that employee does get some help from the city for the retirement health care. But then we've paid our liability that year, and it's taken care of. It won't grow in the future. All right, we have time for maybe one more question. I'll go make myself available in the hall if anyone wants to talk to me directly about this, so that we can get set up for the Meet the Candidates event. Any final questions? We have time for one? No? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your interest. Thanks for the questions.